This is the Sports and Society podcast, where we go beyond scores, statistics, and personalities to focus on issues and controversies in sports worlds. Your hosts, Jay Coakley and Jeff Montes de Oca, are sports sociologists and the authors of the book, Sports and Society, Issues and Controversies. The episodes in this podcast give you a behind-the-scenes look at the textbook with stories from our lives as scholars and athletes, as well as providing analysis of ongoing issues and controversies in contemporary sport worlds. We welcome hearing your thoughts and analysis, so please use this space to engage with us about the textbook or any of the topics we cover in this podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Sports and Society podcast. Your hosts are Jay Coakley and Jeff Montes de Oca. Hey, Jay.
Hey, good to see you, Jeff, and I'm looking forward to this discussion here. This is going to be good.
Yeah, me too, because in this episode, we're discussing Black feminist thought with two amazing scholars, my dear friend Letitia Brown and my new friend Tamika Ferguson. This episode is directly related to Chapter 7 on gender and Chapter 8 on race and sports. So our guest, Dr. Letitia Brown, is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Brown is a Black feminist interdisciplinary scholar who researches the lived realities of Black girl women in sport, media, education, and girlhood. Her first book, Say Her Name, Centering Black Feminism and Black Women in Sports, is the first Black feminist text in the Rutgers University Press series on critical issues in sport. I know a little bit about that series since I am one of the co-editors of the series, and we are super stoked to have Dr. Brown's book in the series. Tamika Ferguson is an assistant dean of student affairs and an assistant professor of educational leadership at Virginia Commonwealth University. Her research interests include Black women and student athletes in higher education, athlete activism and social justice, college access and student success, and inclusive leadership. She is also the founder of the Black Athlete Sister Circle program. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation, and we're excited to have a conversation with you today.
Definitely looking forward to this conversation. Good to see everybody.
All right. Well, let's jump in with the first two questions. We ask everybody these questions. The first one is, and why don't we have Dr. Ferguson go first? Why don't you describe your experience in sports for us?
So this is such a fun question. I actually have been an athlete my entire life. I was a member of the University of Virginia track and field team in undergrad. I also was a cheerleader in middle school and in high school. I didn't start running track until 9th grade. And so I ran track at UVA. I was a walk-on. I earned a scholarship, was able to compete at the national level at the national championships, have a school record that still exists there. I did the Olympic trials. So I had a very, very stellar career at UVA. And I also have dabbled in coaching and learned that it is better being in the scholarly side than it is training athletes. So that was a fun experience, but so glad I got to try it out. But sports has just been a part of who I am. And now I'm also a mom to a budding basketball player and swimmer. So I have not left it. It won't leave me. And I just keep being introduced to more sports that are really not my strength area, but also are really fun to watch my daughter develop her skill set in.
Dr. Brown.
Oh, I love that answer. And I love this question. And I talk about it a little bit in my book that it's much better that I'm on the academic side of things. You know, I participated in sports since I was little. I did cheer, track, soccer, gymnastics. And one of the first pictures in the book is me as a little ballerina. Like, I loved sports. I loved all of them, but I was never going to be a great athlete because I'm a very clumsy person. And so I was always injured at like the crucial moments. It would be like, oh, track season is starting. Who's going to be the first person to fall in a gopher hole and twist their ankle? This girl. You know, soccer, one season you get to play for the first time. How many concussions do you get? 2. So I can't play soccer anymore because my uncle's like, I think at this point in time, we realize that your brain is probably a lot stronger than your body. So, like, let's keep that because you're not going to make it in sports. And I'm like, okay, but I love them because everyone in my family loves sports and I just want to be, part of the team, but it's better to be on the team from the academic end. But I love watching tennis. I grew up watching, like Venus and Serena, and they completely like shaped the way that I understood sports. Like Dominique Dawes in gymnastics has been a hero of mine since I was like 6. So I am really, really grateful to sports. They taught me a lot, even though I was never going to make it.
Well, you and me both. I also come from a very athletic family. Lots of people that went to college on scholarships, and I was always the kid that was picked in the middle of the pack for kickball in elementary school. But I love that you brought up the Williams sisters and Dominique Dawes and how impactful they were on you. And maybe that's a great transition to our next question, which is to talk. And why don't you lead this time, Dr. Brown? Talk about how your experience in sport has influenced the questions you ask and the research that you conduct.
That's a really good question. When I went to graduate school, I had no idea that I was going to start studying sports. Like initially, I was really interested in studying eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia in women of color because there was just so little research on it. But I had read this amazing memoir called Not All Black Girls Know How to Eat, a story of bulimia that really just like opened my eyes to the realities of things that I'd seen but hadn't really had a name for. And then I get to the University of Texas at Austin and I meet Dr. Ben Carrington and he introduces me to, critical sports studies through the lens of like Castor Semenya. And so like being a Black girl who grew up playing sports, even though I was never going to be great at sports, I think it definitely influences the ways that I ask questions and the types of questions that I ask. I know that when I was reading Dr. Carrington's work for the longest time, I just kept asking, but like, well, where are the women? Like, where are the women in your work? Where are the women that we can talk about in the same breath that we talk about Jack Johnson or that we talk about Tommy Smith and John Carlos? And he was like, well, I don't know. Why don't you find the women? And I was like, okay, sure. I like a challenge. And so I think that knowing that there are so many stories that still need to be told about Black girls and Black women in sports, and even thinking about, like the career of the Williams sisters or of like Dominique Dawes, because she and Betty Okino were the first, Black women to make the U.S. Olympic team in 1992. But we still very rarely hear about Betty. And I feel like people forget that Betty was there, but she was there. And then Dominique Dawes was like the first to go to like 3 Olympics in a row. And then we have like, Simone Biles and all of the new athletes. And so I think it's important that we kind of remember these histories. And I'm glad that I was put in a space where these questions came to the forefront of my mind. And I was in a space where it was encouraged to ask these questions and to wonder what more we could do.
And let me just ask you a question, Dr. Brown. The fact that you knew that you were not going to make it, did that influence the kinds of questions you asked? Because, the vast majority of people are not going to make it. And I think that offers a unique perspective, or at least a different perspective than we oftentimes see in some of the research.
Wow, I hadn't even really thought about that, but I'm sure it does. I'm sure that it has a big influence on the reasons that I ask the questions. In my next project, I'm really looking forward to doing interviews and actually talking with Black women athletes. And I think that the little athlete that still lives inside of me has questions that only I can ask now as an academic who's kind of learned the language behind those questions that I kind of always had. I'm going to have to think about that some more, though. Thanks, Jay.
That's amazing. And Dr. Ferguson, can you talk also about how your sports experience influenced the questions you're asking, the research you've done, but then also the applied work you do?
Yeah. So when I was at the University of Virginia, as I mentioned, I was a walk-on athlete. And that means that I did not go thinking that I was going to be an athlete. When I was accepted to UVA, it was purely because I went to graduate in 3 years and go to UVA law school. So walking on the track and field team, the tumultuous year that I had of trying to learn of what it is to go from like not being recruited to this Division I athlete, it required so much of me. And much of what that was about the experience of actually also leaning into that student identity. And so when I left undergrad, I actually, took a year off. I worked as a college advisor for an AmeriCorps program while serving as a volunteer assistant coach at UVA, while also training for the Olympic trials. I had like this really unique experience because I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I never saw myself having like this longevity in track and field. And so my entire approach into going into grad school was into higher education and student affairs. I wanted to work in higher education to improve the student experience. I was looking at all of the things that I think we don't pay attention to when it comes to the athlete experience. I was caring about the relationships with faculty members. I was caring about like, are they in the dorms? Are they getting internships and jobs? What's their actual student experience like on the campus? And so that has always been my entry point and my starting point when it comes to my research, because I was not, the traditional athlete who was recruited and coveted and protected and all of that. I earned that once I was at UVA later, but I was an active person at UVA. I maintained a job for 15 hours a week. I double majored, I minored, I was volunteering, I was starting pre-law societies. I was having a very traditional student experience while also being an athlete, an elite athlete. And not everybody understands how significant that dichotomous experience can be. But that has always been my lens. And so when I think about what sports did for me, is it gave me this bifurcated view that we focus so much on the sport experience, so much on the athlete well-being, that we forget that there's actually this whole thing of why they're there in the first place, which is to get a degree. And so when I went into my doctoral program, I actually went to do a dissertation on enrollment management of Black kids from rural communities. And I remember taking that idea to all of my faculty, and they were like, you're going to be in school for a long time. You're going to have to do a quant, and I don't do quant, right? So that was an easy way to say no to that dissertation topic. And I see Letitia laughing at me, but that's fine. But what I love about switching over to do was I was able to find a gap in the literature, similar to what Dr. Brown said. There were no real stories being told that were contemporary outside of Dr. Keela Carter-Francique's work. That was what I found. It was her. Like, if it was not for her work, I would not have been able to really write a dissertation. And so I think about the focus that we have so much on the athlete and their performance, and that has always been my entry point. And so what started out as me search has developed. And so now, for instance, I am an administrator as an assistant dean for student affairs, leaning into those roots of my doctoral work, leaning into the work of focusing on the student life cycle, from recruitment, the retention, to academic advising, to student support, to well-being, to like the mental well-being, of course, of all students. But I'm in this, and that's my lens in my research. And so I think it's interesting, and you mentioned, Jeff, the focus on being practical. I don't think that I am like the scholar who produces work that's just to be read. Like, I want to do work that changes lives. And so that's what the Black Athlete Sister Circle was about. And in my practical work, I am all about the development of Black women. Also now, just the development of college athletes, to know that when that degree is handed to you, you have so many opportunities. You have so many things that you can do, because I want us to think more about the quality of their experience. Can they be employable upon graduation? Do they have skill sets and experiences that set them up for a trajectory for not only career dexterity, but mobility and the ability to articulate those 4+ years that they spent at that institution? And so that's always my entry point, because I had the privilege of having like this great academic experience at a strong institution and also this great athletic experience at an ACC school, I've got to put my foot into two worlds in elite levels. And it has drastically changed and really shaped my entry point into research. I don't really research anything that cannot be implemented, or I won't do anything that will not inform policy or practice. And so I don't know how not to do that, because when I was going through UVA, if it wasn't for my track teammates who looked like me and my amazing coach who mentored me, I would not be where I am. But there were also academic administrators who were academic advisors who reared me, who wrote letters of nomination, who told me to do the volunteer work. And so I think we have to focus on that experience, and especially during this time, because it's so many things competing for the attention of athletes. But really, my experience as a athlete, as a walk-on, I think shapes my view around the student success point of being an athlete.
That is so amazing. And from what I'm hearing from you, what you do is the definition of this term that keeps coming up in this podcast, praxis, right? The idea of, or what I mean by that is how we take our ideas and make them real through our social practices, through the things that we do. And that's what you're doing, using research to guide the actions that you have, the policies you're creating, the programs and institutions you're creating. I mean, it just reminds me of, Jay keeps talking about sport management as applied sociology. And that's what you're describing is your applied sociology. It raises a question for me, just going a little bit off the script here, but when I was in grad school at the University of Southern California, I worked in the Student Athletic Center. And it was so eye-opening in so many different ways. But one of the things that really struck me is, and I worked almost exclusively with football players. This was the Pete Carroll era. Football is such a big deal at USC. One of the things I saw with the football players is they had a huge range of preparation for college. Some were very well prepared, and it was pretty easy for them to get to school. Others were not well prepared, not because they weren't. I mean, these kids are smart. I never met a Division I football player who isn't incredibly smart. They have to be, but that doesn't mean they were prepared to be at a private university in Southern California. And as football players, generally they're large Black men in a very white dominated school. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the factors that lead to this unevenness of preparation and the difficulties that some of the athletes are going to have, not just football players, but some of the athletes will have once they get to that college campus?
Yeah, you're all in my research agenda. So, to preference this, I've actually expanded my research agenda because of this very thing. When I was working for that AmeriCorps program, it was the College Advising Corps. I was actually a college advisor in a rural community. And so I now actually do work looking at the experiences of Black girls and Black girl athletes in K-12 rural schools. And I've had to expand because of the preparation or lack thereof that athletes bring. So if a student athlete is coming from a high school where they have not had access to a college going culture in that school or community, they are starting at a disadvantage. And so a lot of times people just automatically think, oh, if you're first gen or if you're from a rural community or all of these factors, it's so much more than that. It's looking at the actual high school experience. Do they have caring teachers? Were they given access to an advanced preparatory curriculum to prepare them for just the challenge, the academic challenge that comes with being in higher education? Were they given access to counseling about how do you make informed decisions about going to college? Because not every athlete is a football player or is going to a school where they will have the ability to have a full scholarship. So we have to make sure we have timely information around financial aid. So there's all these factors about high expectations, encouragement, access to around college knowledge is kind of like a layman's term for it. Do they understand how to evaluate a school? Can they stay there? What do they look for? Can they visit college? There's all these aspects of a college going culture that when complemented with a really strong athlete and athletic prowess that a student has, those are the students that are going to be successful in any institution they go to. That's the student that can thrive as a partial scholarship and, a walk-on, a D2, a D3, a D1, because they were ready before they got to college. When student athletes have not had access to a college-going culture, they are starting not only at a disadvantage, but they also now have to learn how to advocate for themselves, to develop help-seeking skills. Do they even feel comfortable to say, I didn't know that? That seems like a members only or an elite thing. Like, they're missing out on the value of office hours. They're missing out on the value of knowing how to lean into academic advising, or what questions to ask, or how do you select a major? Why should my major connect to my career outcomes? They're also missing some of those things that we take for granted, such as how to study, where to study, what to do. If you had an IEP in high school, that doesn't mean that you're unintelligent, but now you have to find learning specialists and all those other things. There's this transference of skill sets that happens when a student athlete benefits from a college going culture, and it is not. And those who don't have it, they really do start off as a disadvantage. And it leads to higher rates of attrition. It leads to students not knowing what eligibility is beyond just get the grades and move on. It leads to a lot of athletic foreclosure because they'll be greatly affirmed in athletic spaces and not academic spaces. They're not developing strong relationships with faculty. So faculty might lean into all of these negative dumb jock stereotypes. I mean, there's a myriad of issues that can happen. And without intervention and without helpful guidance on the college side to identify what is that starting point, what is that benchmark that our athletes should come in with, then we have people that are coming in and we don't know at what point they're going to self-identify as someone who needs more assistance outside of academic distress. And that's being seen as not going to class or having poor grades. So I say all that to say that we need to do a really good job of asking good questions in recruitment, leaning into admissions counselors, making sure that whoever our recruitment team is on for the higher education side, that we're asking, what do they know about going to college? Because that will let you know everything. If a student needs to come and take summer school, like, do they need a mentor? There's so many missed opportunities we have because we assume that because they're able to be recruited, that they're able to be retained and they're prepared to be retained. And that in itself has been proven as a fallacy.
Wow, that's so much, and you're doing such great work. So this does lead us. I mean, you've done actually a great job leading us back onto script and the next question that I wanted to talk about, because Jay and I were so excited about this episode. We really wanted to talk about Black feminist thought. And so for some of the people listening, that might not be clear what that is. So maybe you can talk about Black feminism at two different levels. One in kind of a formal sense of like what might be a formal definition of Black feminism, but I think also, what does that mean for you in your everyday life, right? How do you live this set of ideas and set of politics? Why don't we have Dr. Brown lead off on this one?
Thank you, Jeff, for this question, and thank you, Tamika, for all of the work that you do. Like, it's really fabulous knowing that I can search your name and there will be so much coming up on Black feminism and sports. So definitely thank you. I kind of want to go back to one thing that you had said earlier about me search, because it's something that we hear so often. I feel like as Black women who study Black women, it's always like, oh, this is me search that you're doing. And I find it, always fascinating that nobody calls white men studying white men me search. And yet the people that have been studied the most and do the most scholarship are white men studying white men. And so it's just like, that for me is always just like, huh. So I think that that's where the kind of informal definition of Black feminism comes in for me, is that like my lived reality cannot be, disentangled from my race, gender, class, sexuality. It is all very interconnected. I don't have the power that comes from whiteness like white women do. I don't have the power that comes from masculinity under a patriarchal society like Black men do. And these are facts that I've known like my whole life, and just the ways in which I think, Black girls are often treated and reared. We see these things earlier than other groups do, because like no one's walking around calling little Black boys fast, but everybody knows that if there's a fast little Black girl, we all know what that means. And I think that that's part of this important connection, because it's like my feminism isn't just feminism, it's Black feminism. And it's Black feminism because I'm a Black woman who lives in a society in which I don't have the same issues that white women do. In the 1920s, when white women were fighting to go into the office and to get the vote, Black women have been working. Black women made it possible for white women to work such that they were home taking care of their children. And so that's kind of these under-discussed and deeply internal like aspects of Black feminism. And I think at a formal level, Black feminism challenges us to kind of think against the dominant racist, sexist, classist, heterosexist system that we live under, because we know what it's like to be marginalized at so many levels of the social system that I wouldn't say it's easier to see, but it's clear what oppression looks like when you've lived it for so long. Like, we're in this moment in the US in which so many people are like, I don't understand how it's so bad. And it's like, for a lot of people that look like me, we done been here before. We've been here this whole time. Like, welcome. Welcome to the reality of the world. Or when there are things like, this is not the America that I know. And it's like, yes, because you live in an America under the veil of like white supremacy. So you don't have to see these things that have always existed in these patterns that exist. I think, Black feminism encourages us to think about ourselves beyond the definitions that were given to us by others. Since the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, Black women have been told who we are and what we are by others so often that it's important that we remember for ourselves who we are and kind of like reclaim these aspects of our lives. People are so up in arms about things that are happening, but that have been happening continuously. I think about, Ariana Smith in Georgia and the ways in which her body was used as like an incubator isn't new for Black women. This is not the first time something like this has happened. Like, most of modern gynecology exists because of experiments on enslaved Black women without anesthesia. Henrietta Lacks had her cells collected without her knowledge, and that went on to create so many different cures, and yet her family lived in poverty without health insurance for generations. Like, these are not new things. And I think Black feminism, as an intersectional approach to understanding the social world, gives us a lens for thinking about how these systems just continue to be recreated because the dominant people and because of the dominant power sources continue to be like white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. And so when people say, oh, you're a feminist, it's because, you have daddy issues or because you're not a mom, and it's like, I don't really think you understand like what feminism means. And if you did, you would understand that being a feminist is good for everybody. It's not just good for women, like it's good for everybody. If we lived in a society that leaned more into feminism generally and Black feminism specifically, like it wouldn't be such an issue for men to cry in public. It wouldn't be an issue for women to want to work and be a mother, or not to do either. And it's just, it's interesting to me that people are so against looking past these dominant sources of power because they're afraid of losing, what little bit of leverage they might already have. And it's like, well, if we were to really think about this, like, there are people that are a problem in our society. And I promise you, they're not the drag queens. They're not the trans Black women that are killed at rates that are higher than others. Like, They're not the problem. The problem is in, white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, and, homophobia and transphobia. And so I think that for me, being a Black feminist means embracing all that I am, both the privileged portions of me and the non-privileged, because I know that even as a Black woman, I have positions of power that other people don't. I have a freaking PhD from UT Austin, I know. But I also know that that PhD does not give me entry into all of the spaces that it would if I were the same as my white male counterparts. My UT degree is very different than some of that for my white male counterparts. And I know this. People don't expect me to be the person that comes into the room with the voice of authority. That's just not the thing. But I am Dr. Brown. I do have the authority because I've lived this. I've studied it extensively. And yeah, I think I'm going to pause there and toss it over to Tamika.
Go ahead, Tamika. You go first. And I'm thinking of the current political climate and the impact it has on not only Dr. Brown and what she's doing and what you're doing, but also on every other Black scholar, especially Black women scholars now, with the current resistance to even listening to the voices that you have worked hard to develop.
I'll try to respond to that as well, Jay, because as Letitia was talking, all I could think about was how it's sometimes hard to define Black feminism because everyone wants a textbook definition, right? So we can, just to elaborate on what has already been said, we can talk about that it's really this understanding that there's a missing validated standpoint and experience that centers Black women within various forms of society that leads to so many complicated oppressions from a gendered lens, a class lens, an economic lens, a religious lens, etc. And so standing at the center of those oppressions where feminism itself is inherently white, but it excludes Blackness if it's not being celebrated through an interest convergence approach, right? So not all feminists will benefit if they lean into valuing Blackness. And that in itself is why we have to have Black feminism, because we do want to elevate the role of women because our gender matters. But standing at that intersection, right, and having this intersectional experience where class and gender and race and so many other identities are constantly colliding in a marginalized, overwhelming experience, we have to be able to have the flexibility to speak to all of those through a nuanced lens. And we have to have frameworks that liberate us, that validate our work, and that stand against these just prevailing male heterosexist, ableist norms. And so that's what Black feminist does. It gives us a grounding for the praxis to challenge when people try to silence us. That's fine. We'll create a policy that centers us, because when you center Black women, because of the standpoint that we stand in, we can liberate other people with us. And so to speak to what you're saying, Jay, when we're facing limitations against Blackness because people feel fear of speaking Black or speaking Indigenous or speaking against the dominant power structures, that it somehow is going to create harm if you center Blackness or if you center Black women, you won't create harm. You literally will create opportunity. You will create gateways to talking about liberated and emancipated ideas that talk about freedom in a new lens. Because when, as Letitia was talking, I just think about all of the ways in which going through a doctoral program is a white experience. It is not a Black experience. Like, I've had classes with no one but white men on the syllabus. That is unheard of. Now, I'm not to say that those white male scholars, some of whom were dead by the time I learned about them, were not intelligent. But boy, they did not consider my very lived experience or my lens or my perspective. And without the inclusion of Black women and other marginalized and minoritized voices at the table, we lose the richness in having an intellectual community that is both transdisciplinary and also welcoming and inviting. And so we can't have equity without Black women. And Black feminism takes us on pathways towards inclusion. It takes us on pathways to have these democratic ideals that really are open. And so it challenges me because at times we want to censor Black women, but because whiteness and because the heterosexist norms are so heavy and burdened, we have to then negotiate. Do I go with my Black woman lens, or do I go with what will lean towards the benefit more people because it makes them feel more comfortable? And so I say that because Black feminism talks about caring. It talks about an ethic of responsibility. It talks about validating the standpoint and lived experiences and voices and contributions of Black women. Because when Black women are affirmed and they can lead and they can be their full selves, it really does lead to liberated spaces. And I'm using that word liberated on purpose because in a contemporary context, it's starting to feel like everything is heavy and burdening, right? We're seeing literal images of these states of protection, pseudo protection, and capture. And it's hard to still imagine that we live in this free society. But Black feminism gives the voices that need it, the marginalized voices of Black women who stand at the multiple intersections that Dr. Brown alluded to, the ability to speak with confidence, to move, to lead, and be political in confidence against these things. And when it comes to athletics, the silenced histories of Black women and their contributions on international scales and even localized, right? Coaching, organizing small groups, being sports moms, all of those voices matter. And when it comes from a Black woman, it matters even more because we're more than likely not going to see it, hear it, or learn about it.
I just wanted to kind of contribute to what Dr. Ferguson was saying, because you were completely right on. And I was thinking about, you're talking about an all-white syllabus, and so rarely are such syllabi challenged or called racist because what are they? Canon. But I teach a class, and I teach a class with like 2 or 3 Black women on the syllabus, and it's like, we only talk about Black people in this class. Really? Is that what happened? Or are you imagining we only talked about Black people because the person at the front of the classroom is also Black? Because if you looked at the syllabus, like even just a little bit, you would see that we talked about pretty much everybody. And maybe just not enough about white men, and that was the problem. But I also think about, this ethic of care, as bell hooks would call it, or like leaning in with empathy, because that is where Black feminism's, I think, like strongest contribution to the larger social world comes from, is that after everything that Black women and Black people have endured for generations, there's still this ability to come at it with an ethic of care, I think is incredible. And I also think about, in this political climate, the kinds of things that we are now deeming racist. Someone on social media commented under the picture of my book, Say Her Name, Centering Black Feminism and Black Women in Sport, "Why would you write such an obviously racist book?" And I'm like, so please explain to me how a Black woman writing about Black women is racist. Oh, wait, I got it. Too much Black in there. That's the problem. But also, that's really not what racism is, but thanks for playing. And I really don't like to play that game with people, especially on social media, because one, they don't really care about the true definition of racism, so it's a waste of my time to engage anyway. And all they're looking for is a chance to like bait a person to get a reply. And that used to be something that I did, I think, earlier on in my career. But now I'm just like, why am I going to waste my energy on you? Like, it's not going to help me. It's not going to help the people that are, being bombed. It's not going to help anybody for me to engage in this kind of back and forth with you because you're bored. Because that's the only thing, is like, you're bored. So you decided today that you were going to wake up and choose violence against a Black woman because you thought she would be an easy target. And I'm not willing to, play that game anymore. Like, if you really want to know what I think, buy the book and read it, because you can't call it something if you have no idea what it is about. Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, just say that you don't like Black women, because that's really what you're getting at. Like, just say that and let that be what it is.
There's a thread running through your comments. And I think it's important for particularly students that are listening to keep in mind The Black community in the United States has always been at the forefront of liberatory politics. And it's not, and as you've said, those politics are not just liberatory for the Black community. And therefore, it is not surprising that Black feminism has always been at the forefront of the liberatory politics within feminism. And so a lot of ideas that are now generalized as feminist ideas are really, were pioneered by Black women scholars, Black women activists. Two terms that come to mind right now would be identity politics and even more so intersectionality. I mean, we have mainstream politicians using the term intersectionality now. And so one of the things I would love to hear you two talk about is what is gained when Black feminist ideas become popularized like this, but also what's lost when these ideas that are so fundamental to a Black woman's experience become generalized and used in other ways.
I think one is understanding that there are two different terms that sometimes get conflated. One is intersectionality, and the other is intersecting identities. And so it is not the same thing. Intersecting identities is, hi, I am a mother, I am a wife, I am a homeowner, I'm a Black woman, I am a professor. Like, it is all of my identities that converge to have this unique lived experience. That is not it at all. Intersectionality, when coined, by Patricia Hill Collins and so many other individuals, and really Kimberly Crenshaw, it was talking about the unique standpoint that Black women experience, that you can exist at an intersection that is consistently marginalized to a space that is completely ignored, right? And so I can be both Black and marginalized because of my Blackness in America. And I can be a woman where that gender has also experienced marginalization and discrimination. And the intersection of both of those is a very unique experience that Black men cannot relate to and white women cannot relate to, because we live at the intersection of both. Now, adding class to that, adding disability to that, et cetera, further creates this experience that's at this unique standpoint. That is the intersectionality. It is the oppression, it is the marginalization, but it is also the opportunity for victory. And I say that in what you said, what is gained? Well, one, what is gained when people understand that intersectionality is truly about the unique standpoint and the oppression of marginalization is that we cannot say that everybody experiences it. And that's one thing. So what's gained is it further demonstrates that the Black woman experience is unique in America, that is unique in westernized countries, that is unique in spaces where they have experienced hundreds of years of oppression. What is also gained when people start to think about it is that it starts to create more nuance and understanding for people who are willing to do the work, not the folks on social media, as Dr. Brown was talking about earlier, but people who engage in reading and learning about this work from an authentic experience start to really be able to not do revisionist work where we are rewriting, but they start to do honest history. They start to have honest interpretations of this American history within this context or within another context, such as the UK or Canada or Australia, where they really learn that the histories that were written were not designed, not created, and not inclusive of Black women on purpose. That changes how you learn everything. It makes you question all of AP US history. It makes you question elementary school. It makes you question so much because there's this point where when I saw it, I thought that I was lied to. Like I didn't see myself and I accepted it. And so that for me as a Black woman, understanding the value that my point has, that my experience has, it was liberating and it strengthened me. So what's gained is confidence. What's gained is also encouragement and platforms and opportunities. But that's only if we're existing in spaces where people are being affirmed, where people like me, like other Black women, have the opportunity to have their voices heard and not silenced. What's lost when people start misunderstanding the value of intersectionality and not really seeing the power of Black women's lived experiences is that they will co-opt it. They will take it for themselves. They will profit from it, and they will never include Black women. We see this happen with culture. I mean, you have the culture of BBLs, for instance, right? This surgery that's happening, Black women, most Black women, not all, because we're not a monolith, but Black women were always kind of objectified and fetishized because of their body. And now everybody who is not a Black woman finds value in it because the media is putting value in it. And so if you've always been that way, people now question you, is that fake or that's real? Right? And it's acceptable if you risk your life to get this surgery. And then you have other people who are risking their life to get the surgery just to feel valued because Black women are oppressed. Or the questioning of Black womanhood and the way that it's visibly seen on athletes, such as Sha'Carri, right? When we think about in Venus Williams, and Serena, I'm trying to think, man, my mind is coming up with everybody. They're beautiful in their own right, but when the time period that they're existing in does not see value in how they're showing up physically and in their attire, then they are critiqued and they are questioned and they are othered and they are marginalized even more. But when it's popular, we'll celebrate them. And when it's not, we set them to the side. We discard them. And that's the consistency of marginalization and oppression, especially in Western societies that do not find value and have not consistently throughout history found value in Black women. And so understanding the terms is one way of opportunity, but not really having knowledge of what to do with that in a political, class, economic space. That's where the fallacy happens, and that we encourage this cycle of not telling accurate histories. And so then it's incumbent upon the person who is oppressed to then rewrite an honest and authentic history that's then questioned. Like, why would you center Black women? Why not? Why would you not want us to be centered? Does it harm you to talk about me? It does not. I can exist. And I think that's the very nature of why I get so frustrated when people talk about me search, right? I use the term me search because that's what I started doing. I started finding and wanting to seek out stories of my lived experience because I could not find it. But now when I say I do me search, I have to create systems of validation and trustworthiness in my work. And I'm working on a paper with that with two scholars because it's so hard to justify my existence and why I study what I study when others don't. You can have an all-white study and no one say anything if you wrote, we attempted to find people. Like, and I write about Black people and I have to still justify that. So I think there's a fallacy that just because we see Black stories that we have somehow reached like this critical mass and we're good, and we're not. And I think that's the bad part of it. The good is that it can liberate. The bad is that it can be misused and create further harm and oppression.
Yeah. Dr. Brown, I really want you to think of your book and bring the issues that Dr. Ferguson and you have raised now. Bring things back to the lived experience of an athlete, a college athlete or a high school athlete on a team that is maybe predominantly white, maybe not. But how does some of these things carry over into the athlete experience? And what kind of an impact does it have on Black women athletes in particular?
That is a tough question, but I think especially in this current moment where words and terminology are being silenced and, turned into quote unquote woke nonsense. And it's astonishing to me how we can have a million stories about whiteness and white people and have 10 stories about Black people, and all of a sudden it's a problem. Like, nope, we're focusing too much on Black people. And I think that probably translates to the sporting experience. And I think, because you cannot take off your Blackness in the locker room, on the field. It is something that you carry with you. What I really wanted to do with my book was to focus on how our race and gendered experiences as Black women shape the study of sport and the sporting experience broadly. So in chapter 5, I talk specifically about like Black hair, which goes really into what Dr. Ferguson was talking about, like appropriation and things. Like beads and braids are only seen as trashy and ghetto when they're worn by Black women. But let a white woman wear Bantu knots and all of a sudden it's like this big social trend. Like, look at what these mini buns are. And it's like, okay, had those for a very long time. And it's like, that's one of my favorite things is when white people find something that has been within the Black community forever and then try and sell it back to us like it wasn't ours in the first place. It's just like, I've been known what those were my whole life, and I find that really fascinating. And I also think, before Kimberly Crenshaw, coined the term intersectionality existed within the like Black feminine lexicon. I think specifically about the Combahee River Collective in the 1970s that were like, if we freed Black women, everyone else would be free, because it would mean that we would have to dismantle all systems of oppression. For a Black woman to be free, we would have to get rid of racism. We would have to get rid of sexism, homophobia, transphobia. And so putting Black women at the center doesn't mean that we're erasing everybody else. Like, on the contrary, we're making space for there to be more voices in these places where voices have been really, really marginalized and really, really ignored. And I think for our Black athletes today, it's important that they see themselves reflected back at them, but also think about what the messages are that they're being given. We're in this moment in which the WNBA is suddenly back in like the mainstream imaginary, like it was in the early 90s, and people are really talking about it and they're really into it and they're really interested. And yet a lot of the narratives that we're getting is that, Angel Reese is this classless, loud, unapologetic person. And it's like, if you're going to be a Black woman in sports, so like, that's clearly what you are, because all Black women are angry. All Black women are loud. And it's just like, as opposed to like this narrative where we should be celebrating this person who respects themselves, who doesn't believe in changing their mannerisms and their voices in order to fit into this kind of like white idealistic idea of what an athlete should or shouldn't be. But no, we're punishing her for being a 20-something-year-old Black girl. And it just doesn't make any sense to me, except that it makes perfect sense in a society that doesn't value Blackness or womanness or femininity. And I think that these are the things that are lost when we ignore Black feminism. I think one of the things that's gained when we talk about intersectionality in terms of politicians being able to know the lexicon, like that brings with it, of course, its own level of like legitimacy, right? Because we're all about what makes something legitimate, what makes something real. You have to have the credentials to back it up. But I think that this kind of intuitiveness about identity is something that we need to hold on to, because there are these internal stories that speak to larger social truths. The ways in which, I was reared as a Black girl are not just my familial ways. They're ways that have been like ingrained into ideas about what it means to raise a Black girl in a white patriarchal society. And those things we cannot undo unless we're willing to say those things out loud. And I think Black feminism makes a space for us to say the things out loud that people just usually whisper. And, quiet as it's kept, as it's been said time and time again, we have to say the things out loud if we're ever going to fix it. Like, one of the reasons racism is still such a problem in the US is because we don't want to talk about it. It's like, if we talk about it, then that's the problem. And I'm like, I don't really think that that's the problem. I think, people being arrested and incarcerated because they're Black is a problem. I think the fact that Black women having, higher infant mortality and maternal mortality rates is a problem. I don't think like talking about those things make it a problem. I think the fact that we ignore that most of our health research exists on the premise that everybody's just like a variation of a white man. Like, if you're a woman, you're a smaller version of a white man. And if you're Black, well, you're a smaller, different version of a white man, but also you're Black, so you don't feel pain. And so it's just like, when we realize that the people that are currently at the center are not even, the like dominant people on the planet, I think that that's when things will be able to change. But people don't want to let go of their power. And so it's really hard to make changes when people refuse to acknowledge that change is necessary or are not willing to do the work to make those changes happen.
There's a theory of ordination that I think is really interesting. So you think about relations of superordination, people in more powerful positions, and subordination, people that are in lower positions. And so if we're talking about liberatory politics, then we're talking about people in subordinated positions rising, right? Getting more access to resources and whatnot. That is generally experienced by people in superordinate positions as a loss. And so they find it threatening. And I think that's a lot of what you're talking about there. When you have the person on social media, trolling you, trying to provoke you, right? They're feeling threatened. They're fearing that they're going to lose something. We are running short on time here, and I have a million more questions to ask, and I think we could go on for hours listening to both of you. But one of the things I wanted to I was hoping, Dr. Ferguson, you could address, and you've already talked about this, but I want you to make it explicit, which is, how is it that you are not? How is it you are? How do you bring this ethic, this politics we're calling Black feminism, to specifically your work in Black Athlete Sister Circle? How exactly applying this work, the praxis you're doing?
So the Black Athlete Sister Circle, I actually created it in my dissertation. And then I was able to pilot it in 2016 at James Madison. And since then, it's been over 10 campuses in the past 8 or 9 years that we've been able to have this program at. How we do it is, one, it is built and grounded on Black feminism. And so, one, it is a centering of Black women in the program and the very nature of the themes. There are 7 themes that kind of guide the programming. One is life as a student athlete. A second one is Black woman student athlete identity. Another one is campus climate. There's one about mentorship, career development, academic balance and success. And so all of these themes really get around, what does it look like to talk about life as a student athlete as a Black woman? What is Black woman student athlete identity? What is it like to prepare for career development as a Black woman? What does mentorship look like as a Black woman? So it's as a Black woman student athlete, but everything is centered unapologetically in a Black woman athlete context. And so with those 7 themes, it guides programming. And it's now like this very framework that is it's very nimble, and it goes along with other programming through athletic departments. And there are roughly 6 meetings that happen, 3 in the fall, 3 in the spring, because it's also cognizant that Black women athletes have no time. There is very little time to do programming. And so it's a 1-hour meeting 3 times a semester that can do more. And so it does more. It brings in guest speakers. It connects with community engaged work, such as volunteer work or partnering with SAC. It's centering Black women who might be on a team like soccer or lacrosse, and it might be the only 1 or 2 on their team. So we encourage those chapters of those organizations to go support those people, say their name, literally, pun intended, in the stands so that they are made visible. And so that is the very nature of it. It is grounded in the athletics departments that sponsor those programs. And it is also led by a facilitator who identifies as a Black woman with understanding of the Black woman experience within an athletic context. And so the way it's done is centers Black women. Everything that's talked about is from a Black woman context. Everything that is discussed is through, how does it benefit? How does it help? How can I interrogate? How can I dismantle whatever that topic might be as a Black woman athlete? And so it inherently wants to flip on its head that there are no spaces at predominantly white institutions for Black women athletes. If you don't have one, the Black Women Athlete Circle, the Black Athlete Circle, BASC, is for that. It can take a classroom and make it that. It can take a space. We meet in the Basketball Development Center of ECU, for instance, and it can take that space and make it just for Black women athletes in that time. We bring in guest speakers that might talk about mentorship. We've had people like Monica McNutt, Dr. Lori Robinson, people who work in these professional spaces come and pour into these athletes to show that there's also not a monolith of what it's like to be a Black woman athlete. And the very nature of that program and what the praxis is to empower these women. I want them to leave stronger than where they started. I want them to see that there's more than just the one Black athlete that they might see on their team. Some people have come and like, I've never seen another Black woman athlete only within my team. And so it's to make even the invisible visible on purpose. And we value and we celebrate and we eat and we laugh and we cry and we craft and we do all of these things. And what I have learned in the 8+ years of leading this program is that Black women athletes who go through the basket experience are stronger. I've gone to weddings. I babysat their kids. They babysat my daughter. I've been able to see the invites. I get the emails of them playing in Italy. Like this is a consistency, but it provides an opportunity for college athletic departments to be purposeful in what they do. And just because you are not a Black woman does not mean that you can't come. And I think that's where the fallacy is. And we've had to like reframe that, but know that you're coming into a space that's going to center Black women on purpose. And you can learn how to be a better teammate. And I think that's one of the great things that can also happen. But that's what the praxis looks like. It's, again, liberatory. It's one of victory because we're celebratory. It's also one of honesty and authenticity because I want people to show up as their real selves. And I want them to be able to say the things that they feel fear of saying in other spaces. And trust me, the group chats, I've been asked to leave because they get really real. And it's for them and not me. But I really value those spaces because they are very intentional and they are spaces of love. And so I do wish that if a school does not have a BAS chapter, you can call me, we can start one, whatever. But ask yourself, where is it that we're creating these spaces for marginalized individuals, including Black women, on purpose so that they can feel seen, valued, and heard, and not just celebrated for how much they benefit the institution?
Wow, that's incredible. And Dr. Brown, Letitia, I'm gonna be a little unfair to you because we are short on time, but you're such a great media scholar. And one of the things that we see over and over and over in the media are these like racial dramas that play out. We already talked about Angel Reese, right? And the rivalry that's constructed in the media between Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. And, Caitlin Clark is the good girl and Angel Reese is, supposed to be the bad girl. More recently at the French Open, Coco Gauff had this incredible win in the final at the Open, and she beat Ariana Sablanka, who is number 1 in the world for a very good reason. She's a great tennis player, and I'll stop there. But she was very dismissive of Gauff and wouldn't give Gauff any credit and said anyone else, not anyone, I guess Swiatek could have beat her if she had, which made a comment that made no sense, that if she beat me, then she would have beat you and and we just see this over and over and over. Can you talk about the way in which the media creates these rivalries and the impact that has on Black women athletes?
So our social world loves a drama. I mean, it's the reason that we have soap operas that have been on for like 60+ years, because people are excited by and they love the drama. And it's really, really easy to make a Black woman the villain. It's super easy. It's like, oh, she Black, she must be the problem, because there's always this like search, I guess, for the great white hope ever since, Jack Johnson flipped the script on what it meant to be an athlete, and, whiteness could no longer hold on to athleticism as like a position of power, but had to kind of relinquish it and be like, well, that's fine. It's only because of like your physicality. Like, at least you're not smart enough to, to be really competitive athletes. Like, you're not smart enough to be a quarterback. You're not smart enough to do this. You're not smart enough to do that. But it's also just, there is this long history of dismissing and diminishing the accomplishments of Black women. Coco Gauff is the first American to win it since Serena Williams in 2015. And what should have been an amazing, like, look at this 10-year celebration, we can come back to back, because it was another Black woman. It's like, well, it was the wind. That's the reason that she won. It was the wind. And I'm just like, again, we're here every year, always. And it's just so easy to take away from the accomplishments that Black women as athletes do. And the media plays a significant role in like keeping these narratives going. The media continues to perpetuate narratives about like Black women as being hyper masculine. It continues to perpetuate narratives about Black women being the aggressor in whatever conflict arises, even if that's not the reality of what happened. Because people remember like Angel Reese for like her kind of in the face thing, but it's like, yeah, well, actually, Caitlin Clark did it to her first. So if you want to talk about it, like, let's talk about it completely and not just kind of try and rewrite these narratives in order to fit with the protagonist antagonist story that you've written in your head, because that's like the script of our social world. But it's hard to change scripts when they've been so long and deeply entrenched and established within our society. And so it makes the invisible labor that Black women do as athletes and as women in general, and only makes hyper visible things that continue to let these narratives continue. So like Angel Reese gets mad in a game. Look, you can just point to that again and be like, see, there it is. We told you, like, she's always angry. And it's like, well, if you pay attention to sports, people get angry sometimes. Like, have you ever played a sport? And if you did, were you serious about it? Because if you were, I'm sure that there is a point in time in which you yourself became angry. And if you didn't, then maybe you should ask yourself if you actually love the game that you were playing. Because I think that when we're passionate about things, like that passion manifests in a lot of different ways, but only certain people get punished for being passionate. I think about Serena Williams and all of the fines and fees that she had to pay as she played tennis. Like, white men would be in umpires' faces, crack rackets, and do the same things. But it would be like, oh, boys being boys. And it's like, is it though? When they're like 40, like, I don't know if that's still boys being boys, but sure. But like, who are the people that get to continuously be seen as worthy of protection in our society? I can tell you that the answer is definitely not Black women. And so I think that that's why it's so easy for us to become the villain in any story.
One of the things I think students might not know is that in 2015, when Serena won that French Open, that was the year she was pregnant, right? During the Open. And so she was criticized for being a bad mom before she even delivered, right? And so she couldn't win. I mean, she won the tournament, but she was still, right? And we see these things just over and over and over. It's these are such important points. And sadly, we are actually over our time here. So we need to draw this episode to a close. And this has just been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, bringing your knowledge, bringing your passion. I think this has just been, speaking for myself, and I know for Jay as well, this has been just rewarding and educational. So again, thank you so much. For folks listening, what are your thoughts? If you want to engage in this discussion, jump on our Discord server. There'll be an invite link in the description to this episode, so you can get on the Discord. If you want to start a Black Athlete Sister Circle, contact us, and we'll put you in touch with Dr. Ferguson, or you could look her up at Virginia Commonwealth, and I know she'll help you get a circle started at your school. All right, everyone, thank you so much.
And check your bookstore for Dr. Brown's book.